Hey guys, so as a rogue deck player myself, I thought I'd bring an overview of the top 5 most played rogue decks in ranked matches online on Dueling Book since the September 2020 ban list came into effect based on data from YGO Scope. Now of course the definition of rogue is a little murky right now because there's not really any events, but I think for the most part you will agree with what I put on here. And in this video, I'm also going to show you guys a sample deck list for each rogue deck based on deck profiles from other channels, which I will credit them and give the appropriate links in the description below, and also provide a cost breakdown of the cards specific to the deck strategy. And if you want to see more videos that involve data and Yu-Gi-Oh, consider liking the video and subscribing. So let's get started. Alright, so keep in mind that the rankings and the data presented in this video are based on October 17th, 2020. So by the time you see this video, the rankings and the numbers may be a bit different. Anyways, to start off with the 5th most played rogue deck online, it is everyone's favorite Mystic Mind Burn. The strategy of the deck is really just to prevent your opponent from doing anything by keeping Mystic Mind up and just stalling until you either burn your opponent for game or you win through Final Countdown. Now the overall rank number you see here indicates that out of all decks played online on Dueling Book, this is the 13th most commonly played deck in ranked matches. Now keep in mind, YGO Scope's categorization of decks can be a bit weird. So for example, they separate Dragon Link decks into like 3 different decks, so I just collapsed that as one deck for this overall ranking. Anyways, this deck has a pretty impressive 54% win rate when it comes to ranked matches. And Mystic Mind decks usually win game 1 pretty easily, and when I looked at their single game win percentage, it was more around 70%, which is insane but honestly not surprising. Now you see an asterisk by the number of ranked matches here because as I was recording this video, which was the day after I collected all of the data, I noticed YGO Scope must have fixed up the data because it was now sitting at around 1600 matches instead of the 1900 when I first collected the data, so keep that in mind. Now as for the deck list, this is the famous Jeff Leonard's Mystic Mind list that was on Simo's channel a couple months ago. Now of the deck list that I provide in this video, this is the only one that's not a recent profile, but it's because Mystic Mind decks didn't really change at all with the recent ban list, so I felt it was appropriate to show Jeff's deck list since he is the Mystic Mind legend. Make sure to check the link for the full profile. Now before I move on to the cost of the deck core, keep in mind that I won't be including any side deck cards in the cost breakdown, and also I try my best not to include any generic staple cards in the deck core cost. It's obviously subjective, but I try to keep it focused on the cards specific for that deck. This means, whatever cost you see in this video, you're of course going to have to add on all the other generic cards like hand traps or draw cards, depending on what you have or don't have. And lastly, keep in mind the cost is based on the market price listed on TCG Player in US dollars, and I use the cheapest rarity possible for each card. Now this one was a bit weird because it's kind of hard to consider what's the core for Mystic Mind. Basically, I just excluded the general draw cards like Pot of Duality and Extravagance, and generic counter traps like Dark Bribe and Solemn Judgment for the price breakdown. But of course, you should have them ideally if you're going to build a deck. And I also didn't include any extra deck cards for this deck either because they could really be any cards since they're just extravagance targets if you play them. And so these are the cards I considered as specifically played for the Mystic Mind Burn strategy, and feel free to disagree, but anyways, these cards come to around $46 US, where a playset of Mystic Mind is about $10 at the cheapest rarity. Next up we have Burning Abyss, the deck that never dies. A grindy deck that triggers their effects when the monsters reach the grave, whether to special summon another monster or to banish a monster on the field. It is the 4th most popular rogue deck and 11th most commonly played deck on Dueling Book. Its win percentage is pretty low at 40%, which is a bit surprising to me. Now there's different BA variants, and I believe the PK Fire Engine will be popular, especially once Phantom Rage comes out. But for this video, I'm just going to show you the pure variant that's trap heavy, such as this one by Alpha Trading Card Games. With the most recent ban list, we did get Graph and Seer to 2 and Tour Guide to 3, so the deck got a big buff recently. And again, make sure to check out the full profile and I'll provide the link below. In terms of the cost of the BA cards, I included just the BA monsters and the very closely related monsters like Fiendish Rhino and Tour Guide, just because there's different variants of BA, so I just wanted to put the basics down. Anyways, including the BA extra deck monsters, it comes to just around $48 US for the cards you see listed here, and a big portion of that is due to Beatrice. Now, the third most commonly played rogue deck online is Monarch, one of my all-time favorites. With Pantheism coming back to 3 in the most recent ban list, it definitely gained a lot of popularity. It's an anti-meta strategy that generally focuses on getting Vanity's Fiend out and or domain lock your opponent to limit your opponent from special summoning. And it doesn't use an extra deck, and it's also very easy to learn how to play, so it's a great way to start out Yu-Gi-Oh! For players just entering the game. And this deck recently came second by Lithium in the Remote Duel Invitational, so that was pretty wild. And it's the 10th most played deck online overall, which is pretty high, but unfortunately has a pretty miserable win rate at 37%. While Pantheism to 3 is great, the deck can still brick hard, and even when you don't brick, it's quite fragile to a variety of different hand traps. Now, as for the deck list, only fitting to show Lithium's most recent deck profile from the Remote Duel Invitational. Pretty standard list, I would say, and make sure to check out his video to get a better understanding of his reasoning for the card choices. In terms of the cost of the Monarch cards, the price you see here may be a bit misleading, so let me just explain. First, compared to my other cost breakdowns in this video, there's a lot of cards listed for Monarchs, and this is because they really do have a lot of archetype specific cards and not as many generic staples. Also, while the cards you see here is roughly $70 US, if you were to consider the total deck cost, Monarchs will actually be the cheapest among all the decks that I listed in this video because they don't play an extra deck. So make sure to keep that in mind. Next, we have the second most played rogue deck, which is Altergeist, a trap heavy deck that's honestly really good. Overall, it's the 9th most played deck online in this format, and in the June ban list, they got Multi-Faker back to 3, which really upped their consistency. They also have a really impressive 58% win rate in ranked matches, which is the highest among the rogue decks. And as for the deck list, I'm going to show you a pretty standard list that was brought by Dark Magician Duelist, so make sure to check his video out for the full profile. Now, as for the cost of the specific Altergeist cards, they are actually really cheap at around $17 US. Now, of course, ideally you should be playing Extravagance and also Impermanence because of its interaction with Multi-Faker, and those are some pretty pricey cards, and you would also have to round the deck out with a lot of traps of your choice, and so the price to play this deck overall can add up pretty fast. So on to number 1. Now, remember how at the beginning of the video I said that this list is also largely dependent on how you define a deck as rogue? Well, so basically, if one were to consider Salman Grey as rogue, they would actually be number 1. I mean, personally, I consider Salman Grey as tier 2, but just to be safe, I do provide a salad list as well after this one. Anyways, Skystrikers is still a really good deck and a great rogue option. A very grindy control deck that makes the use of really strong spells and a ton of hand traps, and even won an LCS piloted by Ryan Yu a couple months ago. And I'll actually bring a replay of my remote duel versus Ryan Yu within the next week, so stay tuned for that one. Overall, it's the 6th most played deck online right now and has a win rate of about 50%. As for the sample deck list, here is one provided by Mystic Hours YGO, so make sure to check the video in the description below for the full profile. I think it's a pretty standard list, just playing a ton of hand traps and going for the grind game, while also having access to the Selene to access code talker combo to go for the kill. As for the cost of the Skystriker cards, the cards you see here come just under $69 US, where essentially 2/3 of that price is actually driven by Rose alone. The rest of the cards are actually really cheap. Alright, so as mentioned earlier, if we were to consider Salman Grey as rogue, then they would actually be the most played rogue deck. It's actually the 3rd most played deck overall in the current format, so it's definitely really popular. It's another grindy deck that just seems like it has resources turn after turn, and has a win rate of about 50%. As for the deck list, here's one by the Elite YGO, and again, make sure to check his profile shown in the description below. Salman Grey got a ton of buff in the last few months with the release of Parallel Exceed to go into rank 4s, and the release of Access Code Talker meant that they can OTK really easily now. As for the cost of the cards specific to the Salman Grey strategy, it's just under $50 US for the cards you see here, but again, these prices are based on if you buy the cards as singles. I would recommend that you just buy 3 of the Soul Burner structure decks, and while those decks are generally more expensive than they were when they were first released, it would still be better off that way to buy them since there's also Ash Blossom in them. You do still have to get some cards that are not in the structure deck, like the Lady Debugs, Parallel Exceeds, Signet Mining, and Sunlight Wolf, but overall, the bang for buck value of Salman Grey is, well, great, and I highly recommend this deck. Alright guys, so that's it for the overview of the most popular rogue decks in the current format. Hope you found that useful if you were considering which rogue deck to pursue. Let me know in the comments if you found this video interesting, and I'll make sure to make more of these with each new format. Take care, guys.